The morning mist hung low over Main Street in Millfield, Oklahoma, as Dorothy Mackenzie stepped onto her porch with her coffee cup frozen halfway to her trembling lips. There, emerging from the fog like something from a fever dream, walked her 7-year-old granddaughter Hope beside a massive 900-pound Brahman bull. No leash, no fence, no barrier between the tiny girl and the beast that could crush her with a single step. This wasn't some circus act or county fair attraction. This was Tuesday morning in small-town America, and it was about to shatter everything this community believed about safety, love, and the impossible bonds that defy all logic. Mrs. Henderson's scream pierced the dawn silence as her coffee mug shattered against the sidewalk, brown liquid spreading like spilled blood across the concrete. Dorothy's mind raced back 18 months to the funeral, to burying her son and daughter-in-law, to promising she'd protect little Hope no matter what. "Call the sheriff!" someone shouted from across the street, but Dorothy's hand remained frozen on the phone. What had brought them to this moment, and how much time did they have before everything fell apart? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Mackenzie farm had seen better days, much like the weathered hands that had worked its 160 acres for 3 generations. Earl Mackenzie, at 75, still carried himself with the dignity of a man who'd once been Oklahoma's champion bull rider, though his steps had grown slower since the doctor's pronouncement 6 months ago. Congestive heart failure, maybe 6 months to live. His wife Dorothy, 72 and fighting arthritis in every joint, had been the steel backbone of their family through raising 4 children, burying 3, and now facing the impossible task of raising their granddaughter alone. Hope Elizabeth Mackenzie, Hopi to everyone who mattered, had arrived 18 months ago under the worst circumstances imaginable. The combine harvester accident that took her parents, both veterinarians who dedicated their lives to healing animals, had left more than just a 7-year-old orphan. It had left a child so traumatized she'd stopped speaking to humans entirely, communicating only in whispers to the one living connection she had left to her parents, Big Ben. Big Ben wasn't just any bull. At 900 pounds of muscle and bone, the Brahman's black coat shimmered with reddish-brown markings that caught the Oklahoma sun like burnished copper. Hopi's parents had raised him from a calf with the patience and precision they'd learned in veterinary school, teaching him not just basic commands but something approaching actual communication. Where other children might have a dog or cat, Hopi had inherited a bull who seemed to understand her grief in ways no human could reach. The morning walks had started 3 months ago when Dorothy's arthritis made it impossible to exercise Big Ben properly. Earl's heart couldn't handle the stress of managing a bull that size, and hiring help was beyond their means. The farm was hemorrhaging money. Medical bills, funeral costs, and Earl's inability to work had pushed them to the edge of foreclosure. The bank note for $127,000 sat on the kitchen table like a death sentence, due in full by December 31st. That's when Hopi had simply taken Big Ben's lead rope one morning and walked out the front gate. Dorothy had found them an hour later in the town square, the massive bull standing perfectly still while Hopi sat reading under the old oak tree, using his flank as a backrest. The sight should have terrified any reasonable person, but there was something so peaceful, so natural about it that Dorothy found herself fighting back tears instead of panic. The walks became routine, then ritual, then the talk of Millfield. Some folks gathered on their porches just to witness the daily miracle of the tiny girl and her gentle giant. Others whispered concerns about liability, about what would happen when, not if, something went wrong. But for Hopi, those 45 minutes each morning were the only time the shadows seemed to lift from her eyes, the only time she seemed to remember what happiness felt like. Nobody could have predicted that their small-town routine would soon become the center of a storm that would test everything Millfield believed about family, safety, and the bonds that truly matter. It was Margaret Henderson who lit the fuse that would nearly destroy everything the Mackenzie family held dear. At 58, Maggie had built her reputation as Millfield's guardian of public safety, serving as chairwoman of the town council's safety committee with the zealousness of someone who'd learned too late that vigilance was the price of protecting the innocent. Her Victorian house on Elm Street provided the perfect vantage point to observe the daily spectacle of Hope Mackenzie and her bull, and what she saw filled her with a dread that had been festering for 15 years. The morning everything changed started like any other. Hope emerged from the Mackenzie farmhouse at exactly 6:45, her small hand resting on Big Ben's massive shoulder as they made their way down Main Street. The bull moved with surprising grace for such a large animal, his hooves clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that had become as familiar to the townspeople as the church bells. Hope guided him with subtle touches and whispered commands, their communication so seamless it seemed almost supernatural to those who witnessed it. But Maggie saw something different that Tuesday morning. As Hope and Big Ben approached the small playground near the elementary school, a neighbor's pit bull broke free from its chain and came charging toward them, barking aggressively. What happened next would be interpreted in vastly different ways depending on who was watching. Big Ben immediately positioned himself between Hope and the approaching dog, lowering his massive head and taking several quick steps forward. The pit bull, suddenly faced with 900 pounds of protective bull, stopped its charge and retreated, whimpering. To anyone who understood animal behavior, Big Ben's actions were clearly defensive, even heroic. But Maggie, watching from her kitchen window, saw only a massive bull charging toward a playground where children would arrive in just 2 hours. Her coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor as images from 15 years ago crashed through her carefully constructed mental barriers. Her son Tommy, 8 years old, running toward her with his arms outstretched before the world exploded into chaos and blood and screaming that never seemed to stop. Within an hour, Maggie had made 6 phone calls, first to Mayor Williams, then to the Sheriff's Department, then to the State Agricultural Extension Office. By 10 o'clock, she was standing in the emergency town council meeting she'd demanded, clutching a hastily drafted petition titled, "For the Safety of Our Children," and wearing the expression of a woman on a mission from God. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "we have a crisis in our community that threatens the safety of every child in Millfield. A 900-pound bull is being walked through our streets daily, completely unrestrained, by a traumatized 7-year-old child who clearly cannot control such a dangerous animal." The room erupted into murmurs of concern and disagreement. Frank Morrison, who owned the hardware store and had watched Hope and Big Ben pass his shop every morning for months, stood up in protest. "Now, hold on, Maggie. That bull's never shown a lick of aggression toward anyone. He's gentler than most dogs I've seen." "Gentler?" Maggie's voice rose to a pitch that made several council members wince. "Frank, this is a bull we're talking about. 900 pounds of muscle and horn and instinct. It doesn't matter how gentle he seems. What matters is what happens when something spooks him, when his animal nature takes over." "Are we going to wait until a child is trampled before we act?" The petition she presented bore 37 signatures collected in the 2 hours since the morning incident, including the names of several prominent business owners and 3 members of the school board. Her presentation included printed statistics about bull attacks, liability concerns, and insurance implications that made the town attorney shift uncomfortably in his chair. But it was her closing argument that would haunt everyone in that room for months to come. "I've seen what these animals can do when they turn. I've seen the aftermath, the destruction, the grief that never ends. We have a responsibility to protect the children of this community, even if it means making difficult decisions." even if it means breaking up what some might see as a touching friendship between a girl and her pet. Because that's not what this is. This is a disaster waiting to happen, and we'll all have blood on our hands if we don't act now. The vote was called immediately. 4 members voted to initiate formal proceedings to have Big Ben removed from the Mackenzie property as a public safety hazard. 3 voted against. Mayor Williams, clearly uncomfortable with the narrow margin, suggested a 30-day investigation period to allow all parties to present their cases before any final action was taken. That night, as word spread through Millfield about the town council's decision, the battle lines began to form. Some residents organized in support of the Mackenzie family, while others rallied behind Maggie's safety concerns. The local television station picked up the story, sending a crew to film Hope and Big Ben on their morning walk. By evening, the footage was trending on social media with the hashtag #GirlAndBull, bringing national attention to a small Oklahoma town that had never asked to be in the spotlight. Neither side could have predicted that their local dispute would soon explode into a national controversy that would test the very foundations of their community. 2 weeks after Maggie Henderson's emergency town council meeting, Millfield found itself under siege from the outside world. News vans lined Main Street like mechanical vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray Oklahoma skies that seemed to mirror the town's increasingly dark mood. The story of the 7-year-old girl and her 900-pound bull had captured the imagination of a nation hungry for something, anything, that felt real in an increasingly artificial world. Dr. Rebecca Sullivan arrived on a Thursday morning in a state vehicle marked Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, accompanied by Janet Reynolds from Child Protective Services. Both women wore the carefully neutral expressions of professionals who'd seen too much human tragedy to be easily moved, yet something about the Mackenzie case had clearly gotten under their skin. Dr. Sullivan, a veterinarian with 20 years of experience evaluating dangerous animals, had reviewed the preliminary reports with growing skepticism about the public menace she'd been sent to assess. The Mackenzie farmhouse, which had stood proudly for 3 generations, now seemed to sag under the weight of scrutiny. Earl Mackenzie met the officials at the front door, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Whether from his heart condition or the stress of the situation, no one could tell. Dorothy stood beside him, her arthritis forgotten in the face of this new threat to their family's fragile stability. "Mr. and Mrs. Mackenzie," Dr. Sullivan began, her voice professionally gentle, "we're here to conduct a formal evaluation of the situation regarding your granddaughter and the bull. We understand this is difficult, but we need to ensure everyone's safety." What they witnessed over the next 3 hours challenged every assumption they'd brought with them. Hope, initially withdrawn in the presence of strangers, gradually warmed to Dr. Sullivan's patient approach. The evaluation revealed not a traumatized child being endangered by an unpredictable animal, but rather a sophisticated communication system that bordered on the extraordinary. Hope demonstrated how Big Ben responded to dozens of subtle hand signals, voice commands, and even facial expressions. The bull showed remarkable intelligence, solving simple problems and displaying what Dr. Sullivan could only describe as emotional awareness of Hope's moods and needs. When Hope grew tired during the evaluation, Big Ben positioned himself so she could lean against his flank. When she seemed stressed by the stranger's questions, he moved closer, his massive presence somehow both protective and calming. The most stunning revelation came when Earl Mackenzie suffered one of his increasingly frequent heart episodes during the evaluation. Before Earl himself seemed aware of the problem, Big Ben became agitated, nudging Hope insistently and moving toward Earl with obvious concern. Dorothy, who had learned to read Big Ben's warnings, immediately checked her husband's pulse and found it dangerously irregular. He does this, Dorothy explained to the amazed officials as she helped Earl to a chair and administered his medication. Big Ben knows before Earl does. The doctor says it's impossible, but that bull has called our attention to 3 heart episodes that could have been fatal if we hadn't caught them early. Dr. Sullivan's preliminary report, filed that evening, would become a crucial piece of evidence in the legal battle to come. The relationship between Hope Mackenzie and the Brahman bull known as Big Ben appears to represent an extraordinary example of human-animal bonding, she wrote. Rather than posing a danger to the child, the animal demonstrates protective behaviors and what can only be described as medical alert capabilities. Separation of child and animal would likely result in significant psychological trauma to the child and potential medical risk to the grandfather, who relies on the bull's apparent ability to detect cardiac episodes. But Dr. Sullivan's professional opinion was just one voice in a growing chorus of controversy. The story had been picked up by cable news networks, each spinning the narrative to fit their preferred ideology. Conservative commentators praised the traditional American values represented by family farms and intergenerational bonds. Liberal voices focused on animal rights and the dangers of government overreach. Social media exploded with #SaveBigBen hashtags competing with #child safety concerns. The attention brought unexpected allies and enemies. Sarah Chen, a prominent civil rights attorney from Oklahoma City, arrived offering pro bono legal representation after seeing the story on national news. This case represents something larger than one family, she explained to the Mackenzies. It's about the right of families to make decisions about their own lives without interference from bureaucrats and neighbors who think they know better. Simultaneously, the pressure mounted from opposition forces. Maggie Henderson's petition had grown to include over 200 signatures from surrounding counties. Insurance companies began threatening to cancel policies for any business that allowed Big Ben on their property. The state agricultural department, bowing to political pressure, announced that a formal competency hearing would be held in 30 days to determine whether Big Ben posed an unacceptable risk to public safety. The hearing date was set for November 15th, exactly 1 month before the Mackenzie family's farm loan came due. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. They were fighting to keep their family together while facing the very real possibility of losing everything they'd worked for across 3 generations. Earl's health continued to deteriorate under the stress, requiring 2 more emergency room visits that week. The medical bills were mounting faster than autumn leaves, and Dorothy found herself counting the same $20 bills every night, watching their savings disappear like water through a sieve. The anonymous donor who had mysteriously paid their initial legal fees remained silent, offering no further help as the family faced financial ruin alongside the threat of losing Big Ben. As November approached, the battle lines were drawn not just around the Mackenzie farm, but through the heart of Millfield itself. Friends had become enemies, neighbors had stopped speaking, and what had started as one woman's concern for child safety had evolved into something much larger and more dangerous. A test of whether love and loyalty could survive in a world increasingly governed by fear and litigation. The countdown to the hearing had begun, and everyone in Millfield knew that whatever happened in that courtroom would change their community forever. The weeks leading up to the November 15th hearing transformed Millfield into a powder keg of divided loyalties and simmering tensions. What had begun as a local dispute about child safety had evolved into something far more complex and sinister, with tentacles reaching into corporate boardrooms and political backrooms that most of the town's residents couldn't even imagine. Dorothy Mackenzie found herself fighting battles on multiple fronts, each more exhausting than the last. The legal preparations consumed their days, with attorney Sarah Chen conducting endless depositions and gathering expert testimony from animal behaviorists, child psychologists, and medical professionals. The financial pressure intensified daily as Earl's medical bills mounted and their dwindling savings evaporated. Most heartbreaking of all was watching Hope retreat deeper into herself as the stress took its toll on the entire family. The 7-year-old had stopped speaking entirely again, communicating only through Big Ben, who seemed to sense the approaching threat with an intelligence that continued to astound everyone who witnessed it. The bull had become increasingly protective, never letting Hope out of his sight and positioning himself between her and any strangers who approached the farm. Dr. Sullivan, who had begun visiting weekly to document Big Ben's behavior for the legal case, noted that the animal was displaying signs of stress that mirrored those of a parent protecting a threatened child. Earl's health had taken a dramatic turn for the worse. The stress of the legal battle had triggered more frequent heart episodes, each one more severe than the last. On 3 separate occasions, Big Ben's alert behavior had prompted Dorothy to call for emergency medical assistance, quite possibly saving her husband's life. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very animal being portrayed as a danger was actively protecting the family's most vulnerable member. The community division had deepened beyond anything Millfield had experienced in its 150-year history. Main Street businesses found themselves forced to choose sides, with Save Big Ben signs competing with Protect Our Children banners in storefront windows. The Methodist Church had split along generational lines, with older members generally supporting the Mackenzies while younger families sided with safety concerns. Even the weekly poker game at Morrison's hardware store had dissolved into heated arguments that ended friendships spanning decades. Media attention had attracted protesters from both sides. Animal rights activists arrived from as far away as California, setting up camp in the town park with signs reading, "Animals have rights too," and "Love knows no species." Counter-protesters from conservative family groups established their own encampment, carrying banners proclaiming "Children's safety first" and "Protect our kids from liberal insanity." The constant presence of cameras and reporters turned every daily activity into a potential news event, making normal life virtually impossible for everyone involved. Behind the scenes, however, a more troubling pattern was emerging. Sarah Chen's investigation had uncovered a series of suspicious financial transactions and property assessments that suggested something far more calculated than grassroots safety concerns. Property taxes on farms throughout the county had increased by an average of 300% in the past year, forcing several families into bankruptcy. Zoning regulations had been mysteriously altered to favor commercial development over agricultural use. Most disturbing of all, a shell company called Prairie Development LLC had been quietly purchasing foreclosed farmland at well below market value. The connection to Maggie Henderson remained unclear, but Chen's investigators had discovered that Maggie had received 2 large deposits in her bank account over the past 6 months, each for exactly $25,000, from a consulting firm that traced back to Prairie Development. When confronted with this information, Maggie claimed the payments were for community safety consulting, but refused to provide any documentation or explain what services she had actually performed. The veterinary evaluation that had initially cleared Big Ben as potentially aggressive had also come under scrutiny. Dr. Marcus Webb, the veterinarian who had signed the damning report, turned out to have questionable credentials. His license had been suspended in Texas for falsifying livestock health certificates, and he had no known expertise in bull behavior. More suspicious still, he had billed Prairie Development for consulting services on the same day he examined Big Ben. As these revelations slowly came to light, the insurance company that had threatened to cancel the Mackenzies' homeowner policy also showed suspicious connections to the development company. Millfield Mutual Insurance, which had served the farming community for over 40 years, had recently been purchased by a larger corporation that happened to share several board members with Prairie Development. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone willing to look. Someone was systematically driving farm families out of business to acquire their land for development. Earl Mackenzie, despite his failing health, had begun to piece together the conspiracy during his lucid moments between heart episodes. His lifetime of experience in local politics had taught him to recognize corruption when he saw it, and what he was seeing made him angrier than he'd been since Vietnam. "Dorothy," he wheezed during one of his better evenings, "this ain't about Big Ben at all. This is about our land. They want to drive us out so they can build their shopping centers and strip malls." The revelation came just as Hope was showing signs of improvement through her continued bond with Big Ben. Dr. Chen had arranged for a child psychologist specializing in trauma to evaluate Hope's relationship with the bull. Dr. Maria Santos spent 3 days observing Hope and Big Ben together, documenting their interactions with growing amazement. Her report would later become crucial evidence in the legal proceedings. The relationship between Hope Mackenzie and the bull represents one of the most remarkable examples of therapeutic animal bonding I've encountered in 20 years of practice, Dr. Santos wrote. The child has created a complex communication system that not only provides emotional stability, but appears to have prevented the development of more severe trauma-related disorders. Separation from the animal would likely result in immediate psychological regression and potential long-term developmental damage. But even as the expert testimony mounted in their favor, the Mackenzie family faced their darkest hour yet. The farm loan payment deadline was approaching rapidly, and despite the anonymous donor's earlier help, they were still $90,000 short of the required amount. The bank, which had shown patience for 3 generations of Mackenzie family business, was now under pressure from federal regulators to resolve problem loans quickly. The loan officer, a young man from outside the community who had replaced the longtime local banker earlier that year, showed no sympathy for their situation. "I understand your family has been through a lot," he said during their final meeting before the hearing. "But business is business. We need full payment by December 31st, or we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings immediately after the new year." Dorothy left that meeting feeling more defeated than she had since the day they buried her son. The weight of potentially losing not just Big Ben but also the family farm, the land that had sustained 4 generations of Mackenzies, seemed impossible to bear. That night, she found Hope sleeping in the barn, curled up against Big Ben's warm flank, and wondered how she would ever find the strength to keep fighting. The hearing was now just 5 days away, and the legal team was as prepared as they could be. They had expert testimony, medical evidence, and mounting proof of the corruption behind the opposition. But they also had a traumatized child who might have to testify about losing her parents, an elderly man whose heart was failing under the stress, and a 900-pound bull whose fate would be decided by a judge who had never set foot on a working farm. As November 15th approached, everyone in Millfield understood that they were witnessing something larger than a dispute about animal safety. They were watching a battle for the soul of their community, a test of whether corporate greed could destroy the bonds that had held their small town together for generations. The outcome would determine not just whether Hope Mackenzie could keep her bull, but whether families like the Mackenzies could continue to exist in an America increasingly hostile to their way of life. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose truths some people would kill to keep hidden and test whether justice could still prevail when money and power were arrayed against love and truth. The courthouse in downtown Millfield had never seen anything like the crowd that gathered on the morning of November 15th. By 7 o'clock, 2 hours before the hearing was scheduled to begin, the parking lot was full, and cars lined the streets for 3 blocks in every direction. News vans from Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and even as far away as Dallas had claimed prime positions, their satellite dishes reaching toward a gray sky that seemed to mirror the town's somber mood. Judge Patricia Williams arrived at her chambers an hour early, needing time to review the mountain of evidence that had accumulated in what had started as a simple animal control case. At 50, she had presided over hundreds of family court cases, but nothing had prepared her for the complexity of Hope Mackenzie's situation. The case files now filled 3 boxes, containing everything from veterinary assessments and child psychology evaluations to financial records and corporate documents that suggested corruption reaching far beyond Millfield's borders. The courtroom itself buzzed with tension as spectators filed in, each side eyeing the other with barely concealed hostility. The gallery filled quickly, with supporters of the Mackenzie family claiming the left side, while those backing Margaret Henderson's safety concerns occupied the right. Sarah Chen had arrived early to set up her materials at the defense table, her navy blue suit pressed and professional, despite the sleepless nights she'd spent preparing for this moment. At 8:45, the Mackenzie family entered through the main doors. Hope walked between her grandparents, wearing her best navy dress with the white lace collar that Dorothy had pressed the night before. Her golden blonde hair was neatly braided with blue ribbons, and the silver locket containing her parents' photograph caught the courtroom lights as she moved. Despite her small size, she carried herself with a dignity that impressed everyone who saw her. Earl Mackenzie moved slowly beside his wife, his thick white hair neatly combed for the occasion. The stress of the past months had taken its toll. His face was paler than usual, and Dorothy kept a watchful eye on him as they made their way to their seats. His pressed white dress shirt and brown suspenders gave him the appearance of a man who had dressed for the most important day of his life, which in many ways it was. Dorothy herself wore a navy dress with matching cardigan, her silver-gray hair styled carefully for the cameras she knew would be present. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she helped Hope into her seat, the weight of potentially losing both her husband and granddaughter pressing down on her like a physical force. Margaret Henderson entered from the opposite side of the courtroom, accompanied by her attorney and several supporters from her safety campaign. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, and her charcoal gray suit projected an image of professional competence. Yet those who looked closely could see the tension in her amber eyes, the way her hands gripped her purse perhaps a little too tightly. When Judge Williams took the bench at precisely 9 o'clock, the courtroom fell silent with an intensity that was almost physical. She surveyed the packed gallery with experienced eyes, noting the news cameras, the protesters outside, and the divided community that had placed her in an impossible position. "This court is called to order," she began, her voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "We are here today to determine whether the living arrangements of Hope Mackenzie pose a danger to herself or the community, specifically regarding her relationship with a Brahmin bull known as Big Ben." Sarah Chen rose for her opening statement, her voice clear and passionate as she outlined the extraordinary bond between Hope and Big Ben. She spoke of the medical research conducted by Hope's parents, the bull's proven ability to detect Earl's heart problems, and the therapeutic value of their relationship for a traumatized child. Her presentation was methodical and compelling, backed by expert testimony and documented evidence. But it was Margaret Henderson's testimony that truly captivated the courtroom. Taking the witness stand with the bearing of someone absolutely convinced of her righteousness, she spoke with passionate intensity about child safety and community responsibility. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I have dedicated my life to protecting children because I know what can happen when we fail them. 15 years ago, I lost my 8-year-old son, Tommy, to a bull attack on our family property. I watched helplessly as a 200-pound animal turned on a child who had done nothing but try to pet it. The image of my boy lying broken and bleeding will haunt me until the day I die." The courtroom was absolutely silent as Margaret continued, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot stand by and watch another child face that same danger. Hope Mackenzie may seem safe now, but bulls are unpredictable animals driven by instinct. All it takes is one moment, one unexpected sound, one sudden movement, and that little girl's life could be over." Her testimony was powerful and deeply personal, swaying many in the courtroom who had previously supported the Mackenzie family. The statistics she presented about bull attacks, the liability concerns raised by insurance companies, and the testimonies from other community members created a compelling case for removing Big Ben from the Mackenzie property. Dr. Rebecca Sullivan's expert testimony provided crucial scientific context, explaining Big Ben's exceptional training and the documented medical benefits of his presence. She outlined the careful conditioning process that Hope's parents had developed, the bull's proven track record of protective rather than aggressive behavior, and the devastating psychological impact that separation would likely have on Hope. But perhaps the most dramatic moment came when Earl Mackenzie took the stand to testify about Big Ben's life-saving interventions. As he spoke about the bull's ability to detect his heart problems, describing in detail how Big Ben's alert behavior had prevented several potentially fatal episodes, his voice began to weaken and his breathing became labored. The stress of testifying, combined with the emotion of potentially losing the animal who had repeatedly saved his life, triggered another cardiac episode. As Earl clutched his chest and slumped forward in the witness chair, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Dorothy screamed his name, Hope began crying, and bailiffs moved quickly to call for medical assistance. But in that moment of crisis, something extraordinary happened that would change everything. The courthouse doors burst open, and Big Ben, who had somehow escaped from the holding area where he was being kept during the proceedings, charged down the center aisle with a determination that scattered spectators and officials alike. The massive bull, his black and reddish-brown coat gleaming under the courtroom lights, moved with surprising grace through the chaos, his intelligent dark eyes focused solely on Earl's location. Despite the shouting and confusion, Big Ben showed no aggression toward anyone. His only goal was reaching the man whose life was in danger. As paramedics worked to stabilize Earl, Big Ben positioned himself nearby, his alert behavior providing clear evidence of the ongoing cardiac emergency. The bull's actions, breaking free from restraints, navigating an unfamiliar building, and arriving at precisely the moment his medical alert capabilities were needed, provided undeniable proof of the extraordinary relationship that the court was being asked to destroy. Judge Williams, who had witnessed the entire sequence of events with growing amazement, found herself facing a decision that would resonate far beyond the boundaries of Millfield, Oklahoma. The courtroom verdict had been devastating in its calculated cruelty. Judge Patricia Williams, bowing to legal precedent and liability concerns, had ruled that Big Ben could remain with the Mackenzie family, but only under conditions so restrictive they made keeping him virtually impossible. No public walks, constant professional supervision, liability insurance requiring $50,000 annually in premiums. The conditions weren't just harsh. They were designed to be financially impossible for a struggling farm family already drowning in debt. Sarah Chen had fought valiantly, presenting expert testimony and medical evidence that should have secured a complete victory. Dr. Sullivan's reports, Dr. Santos's psychological evaluation, and even Earl's cardiologist had testified that Big Ben posed no danger and was, in fact, a medical necessity for the family. But Maggie Henderson's lawyers had countered with liability statistics, insurance industry concerns, and what-if scenarios that painted nightmare pictures of lawsuits and catastrophic injuries. The judge's final words still echoed through Dorothy's mind as she sat in the farm kitchen, staring at the legal documents that might as well have been a death sentence. While the court recognizes the emotional bond between the child and the animal, public safety must remain our paramount concern. The court's conditions ensure that bond can continue while protecting the community from potential liability. 48 hours. That's how long they had to comply with the insurance requirement or face immediate removal of Big Ben. Dorothy had spent the entire day on the phone with insurance companies, each conversation ending the same way. No company would provide coverage for a 900-pound bull on a residential property at any price that a farming family could afford. The cheapest quote she'd received was $47,000 annually, nearly twice Earl's Social Security income. Earl's condition had deteriorated dramatically since the hearing. The stress of testifying, combined with the crushing disappointment of the verdict, had triggered the most severe heart episode yet. Dr. Morrison had been blunt during his last visit. Earl's heart was failing rapidly, and another major stress event could be fatal. The bitter irony was that Big Ben, the very animal being forced away, was the early warning system that had kept Earl alive through dozens of minor episodes. Hope had not spoken a single word since the verdict was read. She spent every waking moment with Big Ben, as if trying to memorize every detail of his presence before the inevitable separation. The bull seemed to sense the approaching loss with an intelligence that broke Dorothy's heart. He barely ate, refused to leave Hope's side, and made low, mournful sounds that reminded Dorothy of a mother grieving a lost calf. The financial devastation was complete. The legal fees, despite Sarah Chen's pro bono work, had consumed their remaining savings. Earl's medical bills continued to mount with each emergency room visit. The farm loan payment deadline was 6 weeks away, and they were now $112,000 short, the exact amount needed to save the farm and comply with the court's insurance requirements. The community that had once rallied around them now seemed divided and exhausted. The media circus had moved on to other stories, leaving behind a town fractured along lines that might never heal. Main Street businesses that had supported them now faced boycotts from the opposing side. Friendships that had lasted decades lay in ruins over arguments about liability and government overreach. Frank Morrison, who had been one of their strongest supporters, stopped by the farm on the evening before Big Ben's scheduled removal. His hardware store had lost 30% of its business since he'd publicly supported the Mackenzies, and his wife was pressuring him to stay neutral. "Dorothy, I'm sorry," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "I wish things had turned out different. But I got to think about my own family now." The sanctuary truck was scheduled to arrive at 8 o'clock the next morning. Oklahoma Cattle Rescue had offered to provide temporary housing for Big Ben at their facility 3 hours away, but everyone understood that temporary likely meant permanent. A 900-pound bull was expensive to maintain, and the sanctuary's resources were already stretched thin. More heartbreaking still, the separation would likely be traumatic enough to undo all the progress Hope had made in processing her parents' death. That final night, Dorothy found herself walking through the farmhouse that had sheltered 4 generations of Mackenzies. Every room held memories. The kitchen where her mother-in-law had taught her to can vegetables. The living room where she'd rocked all 4 of her children to sleep. The bedroom where she'd nursed Earl through pneumonia and celebrated 53 years of marriage. Tomorrow, she would have to start making plans to pack it all up, to abandon the life they'd built in favor of some small apartment in town where Earl's final months could be spent in anonymous comfort. In the barn, Hope had fallen asleep curled against Big Ben's side, her small hand resting on his massive shoulder. The bull's eyes were alert and watchful, as if he understood that this was their last night together. Dorothy stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, wondering how she would find the strength to wake her granddaughter in the morning and explained that sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the cold calculations of law and liability. Earl appeared beside her, moving slowly but determined. His face was gray with exhaustion, but his eyes held the same fierce determination that had carried him through the bull riding circuit 50 years ago. "Dorothy," he wheezed, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time to tell Hope the truth about her parents' research, about what Big Ben really is." The secret they'd kept locked away in the attic, the research journals, the training videos, the medical documentation that proved Big Ben wasn't just a pet but a scientifically trained medical alert animal, had seemed too complex for a 7-year-old to understand. But looking at Hope sleeping peacefully beside her bull, Dorothy realized they had underestimated the depth of her granddaughter's understanding. As the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of what might be their last day as a complete family, Dorothy made a decision that would change everything. Some secrets were too dangerous to keep, even from a child who had already lost more than anyone should have to bear. At 5:30 in the morning, 3 hours before the sanctuary truck was scheduled to arrive, Dorothy Mackenzie climbed the narrow stairs to the farmhouse attic with a determination that surprised her arthritic joints. Earl followed slowly behind, his breathing labored, but his resolve unwavering. They had agreed the night before that Hope deserved to know the full truth about her parents' work, about Big Ben's true nature, and about the forces that were tearing their family apart. The dusty attic held treasures that hadn't seen daylight in 18 months. Plastic storage bins contained Dr. Michael and Dr. Susan Mackenzie's research files, training videos, and detailed documentation of a project that had consumed the last 5 years of their lives. Earl pulled down a heavy box marked Big Ben, Medical Alert Training Protocol, while Dorothy retrieved a laptop computer that contained hundreds of hours of training footage. When they returned to the kitchen, Hope was already awake, sitting at the table with her hands folded in a way that reminded Dorothy heartbreakingly of her son at that age. The 7-year-old's eyes were red from crying, but she looked at her grandparents with a composure that spoke of someone far older than her years. "Honey," Dorothy began gently, "there are some things about your mommy and daddy's work that we need to tell you. Things that might help explain why Big Ben is so special, and why some people are afraid of him." The documents Earl spread across the kitchen table told an extraordinary story. Dr. Michael and Dr. Susan Mackenzie hadn't just been country veterinarians. They had been conducting groundbreaking research into animal-assisted medical alert systems. Big Ben had been trained from birth using techniques developed at veterinary schools and refined through years of careful study. Every interaction, every command, every behavioral response had been meticulously documented and refined. The training videos showed Hope's parents working with Big Ben from the time he was a calf, teaching him to recognize the subtle physiological changes that preceded cardiac episodes, seizures, and other medical emergencies. The research had been funded by a grant from Oklahoma State University's veterinary program with the goal of developing standardized protocols for training large animals as medical alert companions. "Your parents discovered that Brahman bulls have exceptional sensory capabilities," Dorothy explained, watching Hope's eyes widen as she processed this information. "They can detect changes in human body chemistry that occur before heart attacks, sometimes 20 or 30 minutes before the person feels any symptoms. Big Ben isn't just your friend, sweetheart. He's a medical alert animal who's been trained to save lives." The documentation was extensive and professionally prepared. Medical journals contained peer-reviewed articles about the research. Training protocols detailed exactly how Big Ben had been conditioned to respond to specific stimuli. Most importantly, there were signed agreements with the university that legally classified Big Ben as a research animal engaged in ongoing medical studies. But as Sarah Chen reviewed the documents that Dorothy frantically faxed to her office, she uncovered something even more explosive. The research grant had been terminated abruptly 6 months before the Mackenzies' death, not because of any failure in the program, but because Prairie Development LLC had purchased the land where the university had planned to establish a larger training facility. The same company that was now systematically acquiring farmland throughout the county had derailed potentially life-saving medical research. The corporate conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Prairie Development wasn't just buying individual farms, they were implementing a coordinated strategy to destabilize the entire agricultural economy of the region. The inflated tax assessments, the insurance company pressure, the corrupted veterinary evaluations, even the timing of Maggie Henderson's safety campaign, all of it had been orchestrated to drive farming families into bankruptcy so their land could be acquired cheaply for commercial development. Phone records subpoenaed by Chen's investigators revealed that Maggie Henderson had been in regular contact with Prairie Development executives for over a year. The $50,000 in consulting fees she had received were payments for identifying vulnerable farm families and creating public support for policies that would force them out of business. Her passionate crusade for child safety had been a calculated performance designed to eliminate one of the last obstacles to the largest land grab in Oklahoma history. The revelation about the fraudulent veterinary assessment opened additional legal avenues. Dr. Marcus Webb, the veterinarian who had declared Big Ben potentially aggressive, was arrested by federal authorities on charges of fraud and conspiracy. His confession, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, implicated 3 other veterinarians, 2 insurance company executives, and a county tax assessor in the conspiracy. But the most stunning revelation came from an unexpected source. FBI agents, following the money trail from Prairie Development, discovered that the company was ultimately owned by a consortium of international investors planning to build a massive logistics and distribution center that would require over 15,000 acres of current farmland. The project, codenamed Heartland Hub, would have brought thousands of jobs to the region while simultaneously destroying the agricultural heritage that had sustained communities like Millfield for generations. The federal investigation moved with startling speed once the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Within 72 hours of the documents being presented to the FBI, 12 people had been arrested on charges ranging from fraud and conspiracy to violation of federal racketeering statutes. The speed of the federal response suggested that Prairie Development had been under investigation for similar activities in other states. Maggie Henderson's arrest was perhaps the most shocking moment for the residents of Millfield. The woman who had positioned herself as the protector of children, who had organized safety meetings and circulated petitions with passionate sincerity, was led away in handcuffs on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud. Her confession, read aloud by her attorney during the arraignment, revealed the full scope of her deception. "My son Tommy did not die in a bull attack 15 years ago," the statement read. "He took his own life after being bullied at school, and I created the story about a bull to avoid the shame and guilt I felt about failing to protect him. When Prairie Development approached me about creating opposition to the Mackenzie family, they exploited my genuine trauma and my desire to prevent other children from being hurt. I realize now that I became the very thing I thought I was fighting against, someone who would hurt an innocent child to serve my own purposes." The emotional impact of Maggie's confession on the community was profound. Many of her supporters felt betrayed and manipulated, while others expressed sympathy for a woman whose grief had been weaponized by corporate interests. The revelation that her 15-year crusade for child safety had been built on a lie forced everyone in Millfield to re-examine their assumptions about truth, justice, and the motivations of people they thought they knew. Judge Patricia Williams, upon reviewing the new evidence and the federal charges against key witnesses, issued an emergency order vacating her previous ruling. Big Ben was immediately reclassified as a medical service animal engaged in ongoing research, which provided legal protections that superseded local safety ordinances. The insurance requirements were suspended pending a complete review of the case by state authorities. The financial restitution was equally dramatic. Prairie Development, facing federal racketeering charges and massive civil lawsuits, agreed to a settlement that included compensation for all affected farming families. The McKenzie family received $850,000 in damages, enough to pay off their farm loan, cover Earl's medical expenses, and establish a trust fund for Hope's education. But perhaps the most meaningful vindication came from an unexpected source. Oklahoma State University, embarrassed by the revelation that their research had been sabotaged by corporate interests, announced they were reinstating the Medical Alert Animal Program with the McKenzie Farm as the primary training facility. Dr. Rebecca Sullivan was appointed as the program director, with Big Ben officially designated as the foundational research animal for developing standardized training protocols. The federal investigation ultimately expanded to include similar corporate land acquisition schemes in 6 other states, leading to congressional hearings about agricultural land preservation and corporate accountability. Hope McKenzie, though she didn't fully understand the broader implications, had become the face of a movement to protect family farms from corporate predators. As the truth finally emerged after months of deception and manipulation, the residents of Millfield began the difficult process of healing their fractured community. Some friendships had been permanently damaged by the controversy, but many others emerged stronger for having weathered the storm together. The town learned painful lessons about the price of judgment, the danger of manipulation, and the importance of standing together against forces that would divide them for profit. Hope McKenzie, who had endured the loss of her parents, the threat of losing Big Ben, and the stress of being at the center of a national controversy, emerged from the ordeal with a quiet strength that amazed everyone who knew her. Her bond with Big Ben had not only survived the attempts to destroy it, it had been legally recognized and protected, ensuring that their extraordinary relationship could continue to grow and potentially help other families facing similar medical challenges. 6 months after the truth about Prairie Development's conspiracy had shattered the lies that nearly destroyed their family, Hope McKenzie stood in the morning sunlight outside the farmhouse that would now remain theirs forever. At her side, Big Ben moved with the same gentle grace that had captivated and terrified their small town, but now his presence carried the weight of scientific validation and legal protection that no corporate scheme could threaten. The transformation of Millfield had been as dramatic as the McKenzie family's vindication. Where once news vans had crowded Main Street to document controversy, now research vehicles from Oklahoma State University brought veterinary students and medical professionals eager to study the breakthrough techniques that Hope's parents had pioneered. The McKenzie Farm had become the headquarters of the nation's first officially recognized large animal medical alert training program, with Big Ben serving as both the foundational research subject and the primary training partner for other animals in the program. Earl McKenzie's health had stabilized remarkably since the stress of the legal battle had ended. Dr. Morrison attributed the improvement to multiple factors: the end of financial worry, the resolution of family tensions, and most significantly, Big Ben's continued monitoring of his cardiac condition. The bull's early warning system had prevented 4 potentially fatal episodes in the months since the hearing, providing medical validation that even the most skeptical doctors could no longer dismiss. Dorothy had blossomed in her new role as coordinator of the research program's community outreach efforts. Her natural warmth and deep understanding of rural families made her the perfect liaison between university researchers and local participants. The financial security provided by the settlement and Earl's improved health had lifted burdens she'd carried for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without worry. The Mackenzie farmhouse itself had undergone careful renovations to accommodate its new dual role as family home and research facility. A modern veterinary clinic occupied the renovated barn, while a new conference center provided space for training workshops and educational programs. Researchers from veterinary schools across the country made regular pilgrimages to study Big Ben's abilities and learn the techniques that could potentially save thousands of lives. Hope had emerged from her trauma with a wisdom and purpose that astounded everyone who knew her. Now, 8 years old and speaking confidently, she had become an integral part of the research team, demonstrating communication techniques that adult researchers struggled to master. Her natural gift for animal communication, combined with the scientific training protocols her parents had developed, made her uniquely qualified to train the next generation of medical alert animals. The girl who had once communicated only in whispers to her bull now addressed conference rooms full of veterinarians, sharing insights that advanced the field in ways her parents could never have imagined. Big Ben doesn't just detect heart problems, she explained to a gathering of cardiologists from Johns Hopkins. He reads emotions, stress levels, even sadness. Animals understand feelings in ways that machines can't measure. Dr. Rebecca Sullivan had built the research program into a model that other universities were eager to replicate. The Oklahoma State Large Animal Medical Alert Program had documented success rates that exceeded traditional medical monitoring equipment in detecting early warning signs of cardiac episodes, seizures, and diabetic emergencies. Insurance companies that had once refused coverage for families with large animals were now offering discounts for households that participated in the Medical Alert Animal Program. The community healing process had been gradual but profound. Maggie Henderson, after serving 8 months in federal prison for her role in the conspiracy, had returned to Millfield a changed woman. Her public confession and the mental health treatment she'd received during incarceration had helped her confront the grief and guilt that had consumed her for 15 years. In an unprecedented gesture of reconciliation, she had used her remaining assets to establish a foundation supporting families dealing with childhood suicide and depression. The relationship between Maggie and the Mackenzie family remained complex and tentative, but it was built on truth rather than deception. She attended the monthly community meetings about the research program, sitting quietly in the back and occasionally offering insights from her experience in education and child psychology. Her presence was a constant reminder that healing was possible even from the deepest wounds, but it required courage to face truth rather than hide behind comfortable lies. Frank Morrison's hardware store had not only recovered from the boycotts during the controversy, but had become a gathering place for supporters of the research program. His front window displayed a permanent exhibit about the history of the Mackenzie family's contributions to veterinary science, and he'd become one of Hope's most enthusiastic advocates in promoting the educational aspects of their work. The broader impact of the case had resonated far beyond Millfield. Congressional hearings about corporate land acquisition schemes had led to new federal protections for family farms and stricter oversight of development projects that threatened agricultural communities. The Mackenzie case had become a symbol of resistance against corporate greed and a testament to the power of truth to overcome even the most sophisticated deception. Major universities were developing similar programs based on the Oklahoma model, with careful attention to the scientific protocols that the Mackenzies had pioneered. The National Institutes of Health had awarded a $2.3 million grant to study the medical applications of large animal alert systems, with Hope's case serving as the primary research foundation. Media attention had returned to Millfield, but this time the coverage focused on scientific breakthrough rather than controversy. Hope and Big Ben had been featured on the cover of Veterinary Medicine Today, and their story had been optioned by a major film studio interested in bringing their triumph to a wider audience. The family had insisted that any movie deal include funding for expanded research and education programs. The economic transformation of Millfield had been equally remarkable. The research program brought a steady stream of visitors, veterinary students, medical professionals, and families interested in participating in the program. Local businesses thrived as the town became known as the birthplace of a medical revolution rather than the site of a bitter community dispute. Earl had become something of a celebrity in geriatric medical circles, not just as a research subject, but as a living testament to the life-saving potential of animal-assisted medical monitoring. His speaking engagements at medical conferences, always accompanied by Big Ben, had raised awareness about cardiac care for elderly rural residents who often lived far from sophisticated medical facilities. The daily routine that had once sparked such controversy had evolved into something even more meaningful. Hope's morning walks with Big Ben were now training sessions attended by veterinary students and other participants in the program. Children from throughout the region came to learn basic animal communication techniques, while their parents explored the possibility of adding medical alert animals to their own families. The old combine harvester that had sat rusting in the back field as a painful reminder of tragedy had been removed and replaced with a memorial garden dedicated to Dr. Michael and Dr. Susan Mackenzie. The garden featured native Oklahoma plants and a bronze plaque describing their groundbreaking research into human-animal medical partnerships. It had become a place of reflection and hope, where visitors could contemplate the positive legacy that could emerge from even the most devastating loss. As the first anniversary of the court hearing approached, Millfield prepared to host the first annual conference on large animal medical alert systems. Researchers, medical professionals, and families from across the country would gather to share knowledge, celebrate progress, and plan for the future of this emerging field. Hope Mackenzie, now recognized as one of the world's youngest experts in animal-assisted medical monitoring, was scheduled to deliver the opening address. Standing in the same courthouse where she had once fought for Big Ben's life, she would speak to an audience that included some of the most respected names in veterinary and human medicine. The evening before the conference, Hope sat in the memorial garden with Big Ben beside her, practicing the speech she would deliver the next day. The massive bull listened with the same patient attention he had always shown, occasionally nudging her gently when her voice wavered with emotion. "Mommy and Daddy," she whispered to the bronze plaque, "I think you'd be proud of what Big Ben and I have been able to do. We turned our sadness into something that helps other people, just like you always taught me." As the sun set over the Oklahoma plains, casting golden light across the memorial garden and the thriving research facility beyond, Hope Mackenzie embodied the triumph of love over fear, truth over deception, and hope over despair. Her journey from a traumatized child who could only whisper to a bull had become a beacon of possibility for countless families facing their own challenges. The bond between Hope and Big Ben had not only survived the attempts to destroy it, it had become the foundation for a medical revolution that would save lives, strengthen communities, and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places. Their story had become a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of truth, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living things in ways that science is only beginning to understand. Dear friends, Hope Mackenzie's story reminds us that life's greatest blessings often emerge from our deepest struggles. At 55, 60, or 68, many of us understand what Dorothy and Earl felt. The weight of protecting grandchildren, the fear of losing everything we've built, the exhaustion of fighting battles that seem impossible to win, yet their story proves that love truly conquers all. When corporate greed threatened to destroy a family's bond with their beloved bull, an entire community discovered that standing together for what's right creates miracles we never thought possible. Hope's journey from a traumatized child who couldn't speak to a confident young advocate shows us that healing is possible at any age, in any circumstance. Earl's transformation from a dying man to a research pioneer proves that our golden years can still hold purpose and triumph. Dorothy's evolution from a worried grandmother to a community leader demonstrates that it's never too late to find new strength. Their story isn't just about a girl and her bull, it's about the American spirit that refuses to surrender, the power of truth over deception, and the blessing of second chances. Sometimes our greatest victories come disguised as our worst defeats. Share your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right felt impossible but turned out to be worth the fight? What family bonds have given you strength during your most difficult times? Leave a comment below. Your story might inspire someone who needs hope today.